Buongiorno, anzi buonasera, buonasera a tutti, ben ritrovati a una delle nostre live settimanali. Come al solito, from now on, I will switch to English because we have an international guest today. So it's my pleasure to welcome Guillem Sanchez Ramirez from Spain. Welcome, Guillem. Thank you for joining us. And well, first of all, can you please introduce yourself? What do you do, and what's your background?
Of course, buonasera, Luca. So my name is Guillem, and I am a nuclear engineer, currently in Barcelona, Spain, where I grew up and where I studied. And the reason I'm here is, and the reason I met, of course, Luca, is because I'm also the co-founder of Econucleares, which is the first environmental group in Spain explicitly in favor of nuclear power. Specifically, our main goal, as I'm sure we'll get into, is to prevent the nuclear phase out in Spain.
Yes, and of course, we are here to discuss exactly that, to discuss, well, Spanish energy system and current Spanish energy policy and what are the plans for the future of the country. Spain, of course, is a big country in Europe, is the fourth largest by population after Germany, France, and Italy, and also is the fourth biggest consumer of electricity after Germany, France, and Italy. And so, what is right now the let's say how is the Spanish energy electricity shaped? What are the main sources and how is the electricity world in general? How are prices and everything?
Right. So Spain has a fairly diverse mix in its grid. It has a decent amount of hydro at 20-25% of thing installed. It has, of course, nuclear energy. That's 20%, a fifth of our grid. And then it also, luckily, thanks to its geography, has a good amount of solar and wind, which have grown strongly the last decade or two. And running it out, it has a bit of coal, not that much. And then one of the issues that we run into periodically is that we have also this amount of gas, which means we're exposed to the price of gas in the international market.
And where do you get your gas from?
Right. So Spain has a bit of infrastructure for LNG, and we're looking into expanding that. But most of it is via pipeline, and it's from the north of Africa. So it's I think we have three of them, two or three. So from Algeria and Morocco, that's the way we import our gas. We produce none of it.
Spain is also a major energy exporter. Am I correct? I mean, not the same as France, which exported a big amount of terawatt hours past year, but Spain exports a lot, some to France and a lot to Portugal.
Yeah.
It's
So
correct.
we do export some to France. Usually, excess renewable production when it's very windy, the usual. And then more regularly, we export most of the time in net terms to Portugal. The Spanish grid and the Portuguese grid, as you know, are basically one grid. If there were one country, the grid would look basically the same. And in net terms, Spain does export to Portugal. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, well, first of all, what's the current electricity plan? I mean, what's the current decarbonization plan, first of all? Because Spain has industries, some heavy industries. So, of course, I assume that it's in the Spain. It's a goal of Spain to electrify some of the industrial production. You probably do need less heating than other European countries, but you still need some, and you probably want to decarbonize that as well. So, is there a plan to going towards electrification? Is the Spanish electricity consumption going to increase or not?
Right. So first of all, when we talk when and anytime we have this discussion, we need to acknowledge that uh, it's a field that is perfect for I like to call them marketing claims in that style, right? So of course, every country needs to nowadays say that they have a plan and put forward a reasonable sounding plan for decarbonization and electrification, which is not to say they're not, uh, you know, uh, uh, honestly meant, but in a in a way, of course, we have a plan for that. But who doesn't, right? How reasonable it is, that is, of course, up to debate. We do have, of course, heating in the winter, not as much as most of the rest of Europe, but a decent amount of that is gas, and we do have some heavy industry. So these are fields that, in case of if we are to electrify our energy systems, would need to be tackled. And in more specific terms, we do have the current plan for the future of our energy is what's called the integration. I always start with that. It's PNIEC in Spanish, which stands for
It's
integrate.
exactly the same in Italy. It's
Oh, there
like
you go.
Piano Nazionale Integrato per l'Energia e il Clima. It's
There you go. There you go.
National Integral Plan for Energy and Climate. I assume the word mean exactly the same in
Exactly the
Italy.
same. Yeah, perfect, perfect. So yeah, which is the first sign that it might not be as 100% serious, because I'm not sure something as crucial to, not to be dramatic, but civilization, the function of a modern economy, as its energy system should be just bundled in with a climate plan, if that much sense. Both of them, of course, being important problems, but both of them precisely being important enough that they should not be perhaps treated like that. I'm not sure if that makes sense. In any case, the current plan, yes, does call for significant electrification of transportation and heating, and to a lesser extent, industry, and for a massive deployment of renewables. Uh, some some quite remarkable claim, like we're supposed to multiply by 7 the total amount of wind power, so capacity that we have between now and 2030. Um, which we've been doing that for 20 years. How that is remotely possible in physical terms, in terms of materials, let alone, of course, economical and workforce, land use, all of that is of course pretty debatable. But yeah, an aggressive expansion of renewables, and at the same time, for some reason, uh, a regular, so a gradual phase out of our nuclear power plants, up to half of them. So we have, let me just give some context, right? So we have 7, I
I was
mentioned.
about to ask about that anyway. Like I
Right,
was just coming to the nuclear phase out policy.
right, perfect. So just for context, right? I said nuclear energy is 20% of our grid. In concrete terms, that is 7 reactors, so about 7 gigawatt electric in 5 locations. And the current plan is indeed to, as part of that integrated energy plan, to uh, to close them down between now, or rather between 2027, the first one, and 2035, in a gradual manner, basically, as gradually, by letting their, but not renovating their licenses. And of course, that is the first big question, right? How could a plan that claims to expand energy production to electrify additional sectors of the economy, such as some as massive as industry or transportation, be at the same time proposing to close down 7 gigawatts of clean and 24/7 electricity, which, if you look at the same plan, is done instead of, for instance, displacing the same amount of natural gas, which is to remain constant in the same document.
Well, I assume that the answer is that because there is this drive towards building a lot of renewables, gas is just better at following them. It's like at some point when you increase renewables too much, you are committed to use gas because you cannot have a nuclear power plant that works only for a few hours every day. Um, and or for a few days every month or for a few months every year. So yeah, I think that's the answer, which is like a technical answer, but it's not, of course, what we want to
Right.
achieve.
Right. It's some
How
sort of mental gymnastics almost, right? Because you have to say, if you want to defend the position, right, that we should expand renewables and at the same time close down nuclear, you do need to use that argument, right? Natural gas is better at being flexible, therefore complementing renewables. But of course, at the same time, you are committing to saying uh, there is a residual number of emissions that we will not be able to eliminate because our commitment is first and foremost to renewables. So it's almost a contradiction onto itself.
Yeah, I believe it is a contradiction, and I also believe that there are like sunken costs that are not being taken into account when you do that, because you still have to compensate the gas plants. If you have a gas plant and it works only for like 10 days in a month, you still have to compensate it for being there the other
Of
20
course.
days. Otherwise, nobody would build it. So you need to incentivize. You need to use public money to incentivize, to subsidize fossil fuels eventually, which is like exactly what we are committed to not do anymore. Um, so when exactly do the nuclear reactor licenses expire? Like you said, between 2027 and 2035. So how many do expire in 2027, and how
Right.
many? I'm asking these questions for a very specific reason, that I do believe that there is a non-zero chance that the first reactors might eventually be shut down, and then the policy is reversed before the last are shut down, because it's
Of course.
exactly what's happening in Belgium.
Yes, and we've seen it. We saw it. Well, the very last example, right, in California, uh, Diablo Canyon being the last one, which was also due to be shut down, but was eventually, for now and looking to the foreseeable future, saved, and it's currently operating. So yes, the first reactor to have its so to be phased out under this plan would be Almaraz 1, that is 2027, followed by the second unit, Almaraz 2, in 2028. Uh, I I know it's four. Excuse me, I don't have exactly the which ones are which, but I know that Almaraz 1 is the first one in 2027, and that because that is the time span of the plan as it stands right now up to 2030. That is four of them, four out of the seven are due to be shut down by 2030. So it's two more after that, four out of the seven reactors by 2030, and I think it's one in 2028 and one in 2029, something like that. And yeah, that highlights a very reasonable possibility, which is that even if the plan goes on and one is closed, one of them two is closed, that at some point enough pain is inflicted upon the grid. Worst case scenario, extended blackouts, maybe in an extreme storm like we've seen elsewhere, that the policy has to be reversed. Among other things, I believe the regulator for the grid has basically veto power over these policies.
Yes,
That's the
that's
government is in
actually
charge of them. But
it's
yeah,
interesting, because the German grid operator just used their veto powers to
right,
forbid the
right,
shutdown
yes,
of a coal power
for
plant,
coal, right,
because they shut down nuclear, and now the grid is very fragile. And if they
right,
close more coal power, like more baseload power, sort of, they are risking a lot of issues like the grid is already unstable as it is.
right.
So the grid operator forbade it. And so the decision of shutting down nuclear was taken in 2019, if I believe.
Well, yeah. So if you want to get into the history, I think it's relevant because it's
Okay,
uh,
yes, please.
in a way the decision was taken decades ago, right? So we do have in our Twitter profile, I believe it's a pin post. It's a history of nuclear in Spain, which is, if people want to take a look, it's pretty useful. It gives an overview of the
Your
whole.
Twitter profile is Econucleares.
Just Econucleares, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna link it to
Right.
the chat, but you can keep talking.
Sure, yeah, has some nice pictures and all. But basically, after our build out, the 60s and 70s, early 80s, which actually put us in the forefront, as you know, the same as much as Italy at the time of European nuclear. We had a moratorium on it, and although it was lifted later in the 90s, we never built reactors again. And I mean, of course, not to get into political terms, but it is a fact that it was the Socialist Party who pushed for the first moratorium in the 80s, and it was the Socialist Party who initiated as a policy decision to eventually phase out nuclear energy in the early 2000s, I believe. Following from that were early drafts all through the following 2 decades. The current plan, indeed, is from 2019, the specific iteration of the PNIEC, but the long-term decision to phase out nuclear energy had been taken and had been pushed long before. Yeah.
Okay, and recently it was sort of renewed in the sense that well, it came to public attention, a new like a new bill being proposed by the newly formed Spanish government, which is a bill to basically regulate the, I believe, the disposal of radioactive waste, but it also contains the actual nuclear phase out plan. Am I correct?
Yeah. So in the last couple months, we had both documents that kind of course go together, which is the PNIEC in its you know official form. Previously we had the draft technical terms, and yes, I think it's the seventh general plan for radioactive waste, which is an update from the last one in 2019, which also is in agreement and contains in it the same dates for the phase out, as well as the name indicates, the plans for the spent fuel, right, the nuclear waste from the reactors, which is another story into itself, because Spain, up to 2007 had plans. No, excuse me, a bit more. So in the early 2000s, we had a plan for a what we called a temporary centralized repository for our nuclear fuel, kind of like the Dutch facility. How's that called? Cobra, right?
Do you, does Spain reprocess nuclear fuel?
No, so Spain does not reprocess nuclear fuel, and so we have the spent fuel in our pools and in dry casks, very standard open cycle.
Yeah,
And so there was a plan to put them all in one place, like the Dutch have done, like other countries have done.
like
That
Italy should do, but we
sure,
are taking our
yes,
time.
of course, and eventually, a geological repository. But this would be an intermediate step in which it could be, kept in one place, some research on it and other stuff, not reprocessing. That was not part of the plan. But so-called environmental groups fought that for several years, and so despite having a mandate from Congress from 2007, a few years later, the government cancelled that location, and so the fuel is currently in individualized, we call it individualized temporary repositories, which is just in dry casks, but at each of the seven reactors, right? So each of the five locations, and I mentioned that because this seventh plan finally establishes that this is to be the 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 repository for the fuel until a geological repository, which has a date for 2073, which is pretty funny to include in such a document, pretty specific. Of course, each of the power plants keeping their dry casks is not less safe than all of them being in one place. It's just 7 times more expensive, and uh, in a twist of fate, might turn out to be a positive thing, because this is really recent from this week. It may be that the owners of the power plants, which had agreed to the phase out in the terms that had been agreed to, right? In terms of compensation, in terms of the management of spent fuel, uh, would find that as a reason to be against the phase out. If it is in these terms, it makes everything much more expensive. So it's something interesting to keep an eye on in the future.
Okay. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about the political landscape. Like the 2019 government was a left-leaning government, of course, and the current government is also left-leaning government. But I believe that the coalition includes some parties that were not in the previous coalition. In many European countries, the left is against nuclear, the right is pro-nuclear. Is that the same in Spain? How is the right? How are the right parties on this stance? And is there any party on the left or movement that, beside you, of course, that supports nuclear power?
Yes, so indeed, the current government is a left coalition government. Uh, in which I think the coalition of like 4 or 5 parties, two main, so to speak, mainstream national left parties, and then a couple other regional parties. And yes, so it is the current stance, as in many other countries, that the left, the left-leaning parties are against, nominally against nuclear energy, and what would be their counterpart, the mainstream right-wing party, uh, without being openly pro-nuclear, like we see in other countries, in other states, has mentioned a willingness to perhaps negotiate with the owners and keep the plant operating, in order to guarantee security of supply and such. Of course, it's politics, right? We don't know if they do that just because the other guys do the opposite, and then that's a reflexive reaction. But yeah, it's quite interesting. We see that in other countries, as you mentioned, how nuclear energy tends to be a right wing, have more right wing sympathies than left wing sympathies. We could get into the philosophy of psychology of why that could be. Um, but we've seen some interesting openings in some smaller parties that would consider perhaps an opening up to nuclear energy.
Um, and what about, let's say, outside of politics? Let's say the movements, the citizens associations. I know you, of course, have you came out recently as an association. You are not very old, I would say. Uh, but before you, I know that Operador Nuclear was doing a super good job in promoting nuclear energy. In fact, he is one of the few nuclear advocates in the world that is like extremely popular. He has like hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers, and he's very active. I know that he is invited on TV, for example, fairly often. I mean, more than I have been. So, how's the public opinion beside the parties?
Right. So we the most recent data we've seen is that Spain is unfortunately among I think only a handful of G20 countries and countries with nuclear energy in which there is the strongest opposition, in particular that there's more people against it than in favor of it. And but also we've seen in these polls, right, how and we can mention it. That's the latest polling from the Radiant Energy Group, how in all countries and also in Spain, the position on nuclear energy correlates to your knowledge of nuclear energy. So people who uh, consider themselves to understand it to some extent are much more likely to be in favor of it, right? Which makes sense to us. And so that makes very important the work of people like you mentioned, right? Our friend Alfredo Garcia, uh, under the label Operador Nuclear on Twitter, who since 2011, I think, has been doing, basically on his own, which is impressive and admirable, the job of educating the public, right? And it's one by one, and it's in small interactions, but we see these things add up over time. He's a somewhat important figure now. He's invited on TV, as you say. So it is our opinion, and our one of our founding principles since we started last year. We're less than a year old, also, as you mentioned, that information and education is a main part of it, a key part of it, because what we and I'm sure you see that as well, right? Which
Yeah,
is when
absolutely.
we talk to people, and we go outside, we interview people, ask them a few questions. The most the biggest or the most common answer we get when we ask them, what do you think about nuclear energy, is not I love it or I hate it or I don't like it. It's yeah, that's a good question. I don't really think about it. I don't have an opinion on it. And we like to insist, and that's one of the important things here, which is electricity is like water, or is like everything else that is the infrastructure of our life, of our modern life, that you only notice it when it's not there. When you turn on your tap and the water comes out, you don't think where it comes from. It just appears and that's it. You only worry about it when it doesn't come up. And so the same with electricity, and in this case nuclear energy. And we think that sorry to repeat myself, just the information and public information is a key in this.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question. I don't know if you do know the answer. You said that current polls in Spain, you have like a majority of people that are still anti-nuclear, but how does it compare to polls that have been made some years ago? Like, how's the trend? I don't know if I made
Uh,
myself clear.
without knowing the numbers off the top of my head, the trend is good. So we've seen some polls in the last 2 decades, uh, 3 or 4 in the last, so between the last 2 decades and now, and the support for nuclear energy is growing in Spain. Of course, it's nowhere where we would like to have it, and nowhere where it is in other countries, especially those in which nuclear energy is such an important part of the grid. But it's an encouraging sign for us.
Yeah, in Italy, we are basically passing the tipping point right now. Right now, on paper, we have more people in favor than against, but it's like is a recent shift. So politics is lagging behind. No
Of
politician is
course,
like willing to jump on that bandwagon yet because they fear it might be, I don't know, it might be temporary, or I don't know.
of course.
So it will take some more years for politicians to catch up, especially in Italy where they lag behind. So I do believe that your country eventually will experience the same fate, in the sense that, I mean, the trend is growing. There will be a point in which the opposition will decline, and the people in favor will uh, will grow and become the majority. Uh, we
Right.
only
At the end
have
of
to
the day,
hope
right.
that
At the
it's
end of
not
the
too
day, we
late.
have a democratic system for, with all its flaws, and so politicians at the end of the day will work like anyone else with incentives, and if there is a strong and growing uh, public discussion about nuclear energy and how maybe it's not the best idea to give it up, as most countries in Europe, as you know, that had phase out plans have done and have changed their mind, then the politicians will just respond to those incentives.
I'm going to ask you a question that was asked to me from a reader a few days ago.
Mm.
Spain had like a dictatorship for most of of the 20th century, Francisco Franco, of course, and differently from Italy, he was in power for a very long time, and he
Right.
was one of the initiator of the nuclear policy, the nuclear plans. Spain started building reactors towards the end of the Francisco Franco rule, and so, do you think it might be one of the reasons that make Spanish people tie nuclear with the right, like with the right wing? Do you believe that people still associate nuclear power with like with Francisco Franco? I'm asking you this question also because you know Angelica Ong, of course.
Right.
She was my guest on this channel as well, and she said that is in Taiwan. It's pretty much like this. Like
Right. Yes.
the party that is in favor of nuclear was the party of the dictatorship of Chiang Kai-shek, and because of this reason, people dislike nuclear because they associate the image of nuclear reactors with Chiang Kai-shek.
Right. Yes. And yeah, we've discussed that with Angelica as well, and we do think so that that is a factor. Uh, Spain does have that, particular differentiator in its history, which is that for 40 years we had that a military dictatorship, and as part of the principle of autarky, which was very important especially at the beginning, right, in the 50s, early 60s, they did look strongly into nuclear energy as well as other things, hydropower, which is a great counterpoint to that, right? We built most of our hydropower in the 50s and the 60s, huge amounts of land use and people displaced, in order to produce the electricity for the growing country, and also was the case for nuclear energy. As I mentioned before, we were actually pretty early to the game, but inevitably that causes people to, or that contributes perhaps to people having that relationship, right, of big nuclear infrastructure with the military dictatorship. But it's the reason I bring up hydropower is, you know not necessarily uh, must be the case. People do not uh, do not relate hydropower as much to, right. When's the last time you heard hydropower is right wing, right? Is what I'm trying to say. um
Yeah, I understand perfectly.
so
I mean,
so
as usual, I'm asking you
exactly,
questions not
right.
because I
Of course, of course.
I'm asking you questions because is what people want to know. Sometimes I know the answers. Sometimes uh, I don't really think that the question is well asked. I don't think that's the point, but I still have to ask you because
Right.
it's what people want to know.
But it is an association that is areas due to the specific history of Spain.
And by the way, you are an engineer, and
Yeah.
let's say that you are able to save the current existing nuclear reactors in Spain. Do you believe that Spain could use a few more? Or do you
Sure.
think that because of your pretty favorable situation with renewables, you can be good with, let's say, 20% of our demand being covered by nuclear?
Uh, yeah, definitely. There's room for more. So uh, even if we do not consider, much growth in the amount of electrical load, at the end of the day, we have a significant amount of production that is still fossil, right? Mostly gas, and we know from empirical evidence in other places that no matter how favorable your geography is, after a certain percentage of renewable penetration, over 40-50%, that causes problems. The example of Australia comes to mind, right? They have a ton of solar because, and
Yeah,
it's a great geography for that. They have lots of land, lots of sun, great latitude, but they've seen in some episodes serious challenges to their grid stability, because of, the nature of solar. Comes and goes. If you have several gigawatts that can come and go, in a minute, that's a serious challenge, right? So at the end of the day, as much as renewables, of course, are welcome and a source of zero or low carbon electricity, you cannot really run a grid that is majority renewable. That's what the empirical evidence tells us. And so if you're going to have baseload, that means hydropower, which we have practically as much as we can have in reasonable terms. All the good spots are taken, or it's fossil, or it's nuclear. And so there's yeah, tons of room uh, to expand beyond the 7 reactors we have, which, uh, they're barely coming up on their 40 years, so they can run for decades more. And that's without getting into electrifying many more sectors. We mentioned before, right? Transportation, electricity, heating. That energy has to come from somewhere.
how is the electrification going in Spain? Do you have a lot of electric cars, for example? I was speaking yesterday in a podcast, and there was like an expert was explaining me that Italy is doing a very bad job electrifying cars because we are uh, doing a lot of recharge points in the north, but not in the south. So people who needs to move from one to the other basically cannot afford an electric car because there
Right.
is basically no charging points out of Rome.
Right. You need the infrastructure. I don't have that data, but I don't think we're that far that far down that road either. We're certainly no Norway in that sense.
And what about hydro? Because you said it was massively expanded and during the 50s and the 60s, and hydro can be extremely good from an electricity production point of view because beside being, I mean, it can provide base load, but it can also provide a lot of flexibility and even storage if you do it like if you, I mean, not always, but some hydro can be used as base load. However, it also has an impact on the landscape, on the biodiversity, and so and I have recent experience, for example, in Albania. Albania is a country that gets most of its energy from hydro, but to do that, they really devastated the landscape and hurt biodiversity a lot.
Of
And
course.
how's the situation in Spain?
Right. So
Or
I think it's 20 or 25% of our grid. So it's an important source. And of course, on the other hand, it has a very big land impact. Right. At the end of the day, there's no ideal energy source. They all have compromises. As you know, as far as we have it, that's good, right? The one that we have is a good source. It gives you flexibility. It gives you water storage in addition to electricity, which for our climate that's very important. We get droughts fairly regularly, uh, but of course hydro is very inelastic, right? Once the good spots are taken, as I said before, you cannot really expand it much more. It's a game of diminishing returns. And one thing that's not that frequently discussed, which is that we're probably going to have more droughts and less in the future. All the indications is that as the climate gets warmer, for geographies such as Spain, it's going to also be drier. So we might not necessarily even be able to count on all the power we have installed if water becomes more of a scarce resource. So that's something also to keep in mind.
Yeah, this is something that we are experiencing in Italy right in these years. 2023 was okay. Actually, we had a record production of renewables, mostly because hydro recovered. But in 2022, we had like a major dry year, and our production from hydro collapsed. And despite that, in 2023, Italy managed to import more electricity than in the previous year. But it's like we are record importers of electricity.
Right.
And I was asking before about prices, electricity prices, because I know that right now Spain get like Spanish gas is still cheaper than the gas most of the rest of Europe gets, and I do believe strongly that gas should be phased out, that we should try to reduce our emission as much as possible. But I also found out that people care a lot more about their electricity bills than emissions.
Of course.
So I was wondering about electricity prices in Spain, and if you think there will be an increase, because we all know, I mean, I know it, you know it, and my viewers know it, that the amount of renewables that you install affect your electricity prices, because renewables are cheap as long as they function, but then they produce big spikes in the spot price that eventually increase your bill. So do you think, how are bills right now in Spain? I believe they are fairly okay, lower than Italy for sure.
We're good
And if
for now.
do you think there will be an increase? And the question is for both like final like families, let's say
Sure,
households,
sure, sure.
and industries, of course.
Right. So at the moment, electricity prices are fairly low, and so is gas, right? And these are not unrelated. What will it do in the future? Well, I don't know, and that's the point. Uh, you're at the mercy of the market, right? Which, if you're trying to plan for the long term, that's not a great position to be in. If you are importing your gas, as I said before, Spain does, and at least we can import it directly from our neighbors, so it's reasonably cheap compared to other places, which have to import it through Spain, for instance, like I believe France does. The price is lower, but it's a matter of it's a multi-dimensional problem, right? And in this case, it's also important to take into account that it's a matter of resource security. It's good now. It was terrible 2 years ago. So there was a huge spike in the price of gas, right? The global price of gas, uh, COVID, and then the war in Ukraine, and as well as long-term trends, then all coincided in the winter of 2021 to 2022. Made
Are you worried at all about possible
right.
geopolitical events in North Africa?
Uh, that's beyond my expertise, I think, but uh, the
I don't mean you. I mean, is
sure,
anyone
yeah,
in Spain like,
I'm sure
consider
they're
that?
looking into that. I mean, uh, Algeria certainly has some leverage on Spain and Morocco due to this that they wouldn't have otherwise. Of course, nothing
Because
particular at
right
this point.
now I know there is political unrest
Okay.
In Tunisia,
Uh-huh.
and like we already seen it. Like it's not impossible that it spills over to Algeria, and if it
Okay.
does, like the price of gas could increase for Spain. I mean, there is unrest in North Africa We also seen a golpe, a coup d'etat in Niger 2 months ago.
Sure, yeah,
So I think that the geopolitical situation should be a concern of Spain, because we already seen with the Arab Spring that it can very easily spill over from one country to the next one, and it could severely affect. I mean, as it did from Russia, the
of
political
course,
problems in Russia and Ukraine affected gas supply and prices for Germany and Italy, and like most of continental Europe. Spain was able to dodge it mostly, but I mean, it could be affected by problems coming from another side.
of course, yeah. At the end of the day, nothing like a supply crisis to, just like when the water does not come out of the tap, to make you consider, wait, where are we getting this stuff from, and can we reasonably assure that we'll have it tomorrow and next year? And of course, that's one of the one very important strength of nuclear, especially in times of uncertainty, which is the security of supply. Gas, a gas power plant, it's gas supply every minute. A nuclear power plant needs to have fuel every couple of years, and you can buy it years in advance if you want to from lots of countries. In the Spanish case, we don't even buy it; we make it ourselves in addition to selling it. So,
Yeah, and most importantly, in the value chain of
of
uranium
course,
itself play a very small role. So
yeah,
even if the price increases 5 times, you basically don't care. In your final electricity bill, it's barely noticeable. Um, what about industry? Germany, of course, invested a lot of renewables. They phased out nuclear power. They experienced a surge in electricity prices, and this is leading a lot of industries to shut down or relocate. German industrial production is falling, and in particularly energy intensive industrial production in 2023 was lower than during COVID, during lockdowns. So it's a very worrying trend. Um, Spain is an industrialized country. You have major industries. So how are they performing? Is industrial production growing, or are you also experiencing deindustrialization like other European countries, including Italy?
right. So, of course, as as part of a global trend, Spain is no exception to that, and we've seen a lot of our industry go offshore for the last, in the last few decades, to Asia and so on. Uh, but it's yet another concern, and yet another reason to make sure you have a competitive energy system, which is that industry at the end of the day will go to where, for first and foremost, energy is reliable, and after that, affordable. And we have the a perfect counterexample in Germany, how it being the industrial powerhouse of Europe, it's losing electricity and energy demand from industry in record speed because it's either collapsing or going elsewhere, which is a problem for you and I, as it's basically the engine of Europe in economic terms, right? So we do have this counterexample, and yet another reason to not basically follow the same plan as Germany did.
Yeah, and Germany. I mean, of course, German economical uh, like downturn is bad news for all of Europe. Even though it will set an example, most definitely, because their
You
their
hope so.
their fall is is being caused by high electricity prices. Like the main reason why industries are leaving is because electricity is too high, and is also the reason why the government is desperately trying to subsidize industries, like to lower their electricity bills. The German government, I mean.
Of course.
Unfortunately, the Supreme Court blocked a plan of subsidies because they were using funds that were originally meant for COVID measures, for COVID emergency measures, and but
Yeah,
because
Germany
those
has
funds,
a very specific fiscal structure that
yeah,
has
the thing
nothing to do,
is
right?
those funds were taken from public debt. They increased the they were
Right.
like they increased the deficit to get this money, and Germany has very strict rules against deficit.
Yeah.
So if these monies are not spent, then they might be used to lower the public debt. And well, they have pretty good historical reasons, of course, to keep
Right.
the public balance very straight. They are really, really afraid of uh, you know uh, relentless government spending, because I mean it
They've been
led
burned
to
before.
Yeah, they've been there before, exactly. So yes, I wanted to uh, so I wanted to say, Germany, it will lose eventually its position as the industrial, uh, how do you say, industrial engine of Europe. But I do believe that other European countries will step in. France is now already, they already passed Germany in terms of attraction for foreign investments. And one of the reason is that electricity is cheaper.
Of
So
course.
the biggest, there are building a new major factory of batteries in France and not in Germany, because of course, like, manufacturing batteries is an energy intensive process, and having access to cheaper electricity is a major driving factor.
And it's a
um
huge long-term investment, right? It's not just prices today. You want to have a reasonable estimation that you can have good prices in 20 years because your factory needs decades to be worth it.
Yes, and also, that it might even decline, because
Right.
once you pay your interest rates on a nuclear
Of
power
course.
plant, the cost, the production, the electricity costs are incredibly incredibly cheap. Um, even if it's in France, where they do operate the reactors in a
They're getting better. They're getting better.
they are getting better. They definitely they self-sabotaged for some years, like let's say a decade, and then now they are recovering. And I am a strong supporter of the current French Minister for Energy and Climate. I think that she's doing a great job at the European level. By the way, this is the next topic that I wanted to ask you about: the position of Spain in Europe. Because of course, in Europe there are now basically two blocks. There are some countries that are, let's say, non-aligned, like Greece and Ireland, and then there are like two blocks. One is like the pro-nuclear bloc, which is France, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, and the Eastern European countries: Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, and so on, and the anti-nuclear bloc, which is led by Germany and Austria, and Luxembourg, Denmark. And the position of Spain is not super clear, because sometimes they voted with the anti-nuclear bloc, sometimes they just, like, how do you say, abstained from
Sure.
voting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is
Yeah.
the current position of Spain in the European level, and do you think it will change? Even if you keep your current phase-out policy, do you think there's a chance that Spain will favor nuclear build-outs in other European countries?
European politics, EU politics are something else, right? Uh, so yeah, I would say the current position is of course aligned with the anti-nuclear countries, and we've seen the reaction to things such as the inclusion of nuclear in the green bonds, right? In the green, was like called the green taxonomy last year, in which against which Spain was one of the countries that protested the most because of nuclear being uh, included in the same category of investment with lower interest because of course, its lower emissions. Uh, yeah, we can we believe there is margin to change, and a lot of the countries that you mentioned that are now in favor of it were at a point, including France, that's easy to forget, right? Trying to phase out at least partially their nuclear energy to leave room to more renewables. France had a plan to bring their nuclear down to 50% in order to promote the growth of renewables. But Belgium had a phase out plan. The Netherlands had a phase out plan. Sweden, probably the most extreme example, had in less than a year went from a plan to phase them out to not phase them out to now being their official position to build like 10 more or something, including some
Yeah,
some
10
SMRs.
gigawatts. They say 10 gigawatts more.
Right, right. There you go.
They will be a mix of big
There you
and
go. Yeah.
small reactors. Um,
So, yeah, we believe that once it's a tipping point, right? It's once it changes, it can really change quickly, and that's the strategy we want to work with.
yeah, Italy, for example, we basically despite what the government says, this is just slogan. They do not intend to build nuclear reactors. They are not doing anything for nuclear in Italy. But at the very least, we change our position at the European level. We are not
I see.
anymore part of the anti-nuclear bloc. We are not yet part of the pro-nuclear bloc. We are in the middle right now. We joined the pro-nuclear alliance, but only as an observer. So it's like it's basically we are in that moment in history where Italy waits to see who wins and then changes side.
Yeah.
It's something that we are extremely good at
Right. You do have a
doing.
history of that. Right.
Yes, it's like history repeats itself.
Yeah. Maybe something
At
in the
some point,
personality.
at the beginning we side with the Germans. Then we see like it's not going so well, and we switch
Uh,
sides.
third time's a charm. Yes. Yeah. I mean, of course, a lot of this is and that we think it's a good thing, right? It's plays to our favor, which is that it's not with some people it is, but with most it's not deep ideological, aversion to nuclear energy is politics, right? So in the same way that we think a lot of the current government are not intrinsically anti-nuclear people, but they're just the easy thing is to follow the trend that they had and the trend the party had for decades. So it is at the European level, and we've seen examples of the very same Spanish politicians who in Spain defend the nuclear phase out uh, in their roles as part of the EU Parliament and Commission defend nuclear energy. So at the end of the day, we think a lot of that is politics, and we think that's a good thing because again, the politicians at the end of the day respond to incentives, and we can change those.
I'm gonna ask you one more question. In the meantime, I'm gonna ask to my readers if you have any question for Guillem. This is right now the moment to like to ask in the chat. And so right now, the main governing party is the Socialist Party of Sanchez.
Yeah.
But I know there is an alliance. I know that this alliance is weird because there are like very weird parties. In you have like the independentist, like the from Catalonia,
Right. So
right?
it's
Is that
in
the
the last election, the center right party won, but the second was the center left socialist, or the left party socialist.
the center right party is the Populares?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
the People's Party Populares. And so the current government is a coalition of several parties in a way that they just would have just enough votes to add up to more than half, right? And so it's a coalition of the socialist, another left wing smaller left wing party, and then a few regional parties, including some, including the one of the two mainstream pro-independence, at least nominally, long story, Catalan parties. So it's not the easiest. It's not the easiest coalition as it stands. Yes.
So is the smaller left party you're talking about is Podemos, or is there something else?
It's called Sumar, which is it's either a splinter or a rebrand or something like that. I believe.
Of Podemos?
Yes, it's the
I
same vibe, so to speak.
because you know that Podemos was hugely influential in Italy.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, their experience like sprang the birth of some political movements in Italy, including one that is exactly mimicking their name. Is Possibile. Was Possibile.
Okay.
Is exactly from Podemos. So
Yeah.
I know.
Spanish party dynamics can be weird, but we're not up to the level of Italy.
No, I did.
It's quite something.
I don't think anybody in the world is the level of Italy. But so all. Uh, what about the parties that are out of the government? I believe there are the Populares, and then
Yeah.
there is Vox. Vox
Right.
is also famous in Italy for different reasons.
Yeah.
I know that
I'd imagine.
there are ties between Vox and the current ruling party in Italy, Fratelli
Okay.
d'Italia.
Okay. Right. So yeah.
Are those opposition party all pro-nuclear? I know that the Populares are, but I don't know about the others.
Slightly pro-nuclear, lukewarmly pro-nuclear. So yeah, Vox had it, if I believe, if I recall correctly, in their platform to at least keep the nuclear fleet and more relevantly, because of the size of the party, of course, the Populares have, without going full pro-nuclear, have expressed, and at least in campaign, during the campaign, their intention to, or their openness to renegotiate with the not with the utilities, with the owners, the continued operation of the plants. Again, it's politics. We don't know if they just do that to differentiate, to do the opposite of what the other guy does. Uh, but it's within the political context, it's relevant that they at least express that openness.
Okay, and what are the reactors that are currently operational in Spain? Are they, what type of reactors are they?
So
This is my
they're
personal curiosity.
boiling water. So excuse me. So light water. I meant
Yeah, like what?
it's six pressurized water reactors, just conventional pressurized water reactors, and one boiling water reactor. So it's the PWRs are Westinghouse and Siemens designs, mostly Westinghouse and one Siemens design, and then we have a General Electric boiling water reactor in Cofrentes.
Okay, you know that actually, you definitely know that um, the Spanish Electric Society that operates your reactor is actually owned by the Italian Electric Society, or it was at least. And
Yeah, yes. So at least some of them I know they are, yes. So at least in the Spanish case, the different companies or groups own the different reactors. But yes, the ones that are operated by Endesa, I'm pretty sure this is at least partially owned, right, by Enel,
Enel.
is it? And I think also the Catalan reactors, as the Nuclear Association of Escombadelos, is also at least partially owned by Enel. So yeah.
Yeah, because Enel is actually a society that does not have. I mean, it's an Italian society. We don't have nuclear power in Italy, but Enel operates three different kind of nuclear reactors. In the only society in the world who does that,
That's
because
ironic.
they operate pressurized water reactor, boiling water reactors, and uh, boiling water reactor of the pressurized water reactor of the Soviet design in because Enel also
Oh,
owns
okay.
Slovenska elektrárna, the Slovakian society. So they
Right.
also
Yeah, of course.
operate
That's how.
VVER. And
Right. Right. So
okay,
Cofrente is owned by Iberdrola. I'm not sure if that is also part.
no,
Okay,
Iberdrola.
that's the one that is not. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of questions coming from the chat, so I'm gonna keep you here like 5 more minutes if they want to ask anything, and I'm gonna ask you myself
Please.
a couple of extra questions. Um, have you visited any of the reactors?
Not yet. We have stuff lined up soon. We'll announce the details soon, but we have a visit, at least one visit in the next couple of months. Uh, at least at a personal level, that's pretty exciting.
And how's the state of Spanish nuclear research and academia? In Italy, we don't have nuclear reactors, but we do have research reactors, for example, and actually our universities are pretty good. We graduate a lot of nuclear engineers, and then we give them abroad. We are like a world champion of brain drain.
Yeah.
Is how is Spain going? I know that you are involved in fusion research. I know there is like a big
Yeah.
facility in Valencia.
Yeah, it's pretty strong. So we have three nuclear engineering programs. We have at least one reactor, so fission. I'm talking now. No, we might it might be zero now. We used to have a few. It might be similar in Italy, but nevertheless, we have a strong research departments in our universities, both for fission and, as you mentioned, for fusion. Fusion for energy, I believe, is based in Barcelona, uh, which is
I didn't
a
know
big
that.
part of which is a big part of the ITER initiative, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have strong research uh, network as much as a nuclear industry, and similar to Italy, right? We have some heavy forging. We make fuel for our plant and for export. So we have a somewhat important nuclear industrial sector in Spain, which is some other reason that the phase out should be considered, with its perspective. So not only its effect on the grid, and as we talked, but also the effect that it would probably have in our extensive nuclear industrial sector.
There is this question coming from the public: do you have uranium mines or resources in Spain? You just mentioned that you already fabricate your own fuel, you build your own fuel, but out of imported uranium, I guess.
Yeah, great question. So we do import all of our uranium. We do not currently mine it, but we do have uranium. So there are mines that were how's it called? Well, they were productive in the past.
Exploited.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, it it got closed, and it is currently not. There was some news last year in which the government blocked the exploration for more resources, but we do have it, and basically we could mine it if we wanted to. It's a mixture of political and probably economical uh, incentives, but at the moment, yes, all the fuel we've manufactured, we import the uranium.
And I mean, you already answered about reprocessing. You said you don't reprocess your fuel. Do you have enrichment facilities?
No, no, neither. So we've very few countries have that, right? I believe, which is one of the big problems we have in the West. A lot of our enrichment, despite not most of our uranium coming from Russia, a lot of our enrichment comes from Russia. So no, we don't have that.
Yeah, I know that France is planning to increase by 40% their enrichment capabilities in order to replace Russia as a supplier of enrichment services to other European countries. I don't know which other countries actually do have enrichment facilities in Europe. I think the UK has it. That's
UK
actually
has some.
I'm definitely sure that UK has it, but I don't think any other one.
The Netherlands has, if not on their own country, like they're an important company, uh, most of it in the UK and the US. But yeah, we see good signs in that regard of countries realizing of course, the big dependence they have on Russia for that.
Okay. Well, I think that's right now it's 7, so we have been live for exactly an hour. So I think I'm gonna wrap it up. What this live will be uploaded on YouTube in a few days, so you will be free to share it with your, I don't know, with your friends, colleagues, whatever. If you manage to convince Alfredo Garcia to come and join me for a live, he says he's not confident enough with English. So, but I
Right,
hope.
right. We'll talk.
But
Yeah.
I,
We'll talk, yeah.
but I would love to have him and ask him about the life as a nuclear operator.
Right.
And I want to thank you again for having been my guest, for enlightening us on the situation about Spain and the future of the Spanish nuclear program. I've already told you, and I've told my viewers as well, but I'm going to stress out that I will be in Barcelona on the 23 of March for the Spanish Stand Up for Nuclear and to save the Spanish reactors. And I'm going to wish you and all the viewers, which were like 50, which is like less than usual, but it's the usual for English lives,
Right,
because
right.
so I'm gonna wish everyone a good night and a good dinner.
Right. Grazie.